Wires. Wire gauge is a measurement of how large a wire is, either in diameter or cross-sectional area. This determines the amount of electric current a wire can safely carry, as well as its electrical resistance and weight per unit of length. There are different connectors for different tasks. Some, like the fork and circle connectors, are crimped on, whereas for a solid and unremovable connection, solder instead would be used.
Wire crimpers are used to crimp a connector onto the correct gauge. To start, first strip the wire. The amount stripped should be the length of the wire that would be within the connector. This is the case in which stripping the wire a quarter to a half inch may not apply. Then place the connector, fork, or circle onto the stripped wire. Be sure to use a connector that is the right AWG for the wire. For example, a 12 AWG wire would need a connector that is labeled 10 to 12 AWG. Position the crimps with the tooth on the top, facing down and over the slight split metal of the connector, with the wire within the connector. Close the handles of the crimper so that the connector is being crimped. Be sure that the tooth is directly over the split before closing the handles.
Wire strippers are used to remove the insulation from the wire. This allows for the wire to then be soldered to another wire or have a connector clamped onto it in order to create a connection. In order to strip the wire, place the wire a quarter to a half inch into the stripper's head, hold in place, and close the handle. Sometimes you may need to use quite a bit of force to complete the action. If you were to want to solder the wire, a quarter to a half inch is usually long enough. Twist the 12-20 AWG wire together for the use of soldering.
Wire cutters. Wire cutters are used to cut wire to the desired length. The process of using them is very simple. It is exactly the same as cutting a piece of string with scissors.
Soldering is used to create a conductive connection between two wires. To start, first clean the tip once it has been heated to remove old residue from previous uses by wiping it on a damp sponge. If clumps occur, you may use some steel wool and gently scrape the tip. Next, you need to tin the tip. Do this by carefully applying a small amount of fresh solder until the tip is covered with a thin layer. Hold the soldering iron in your dominant hand and a long piece of solder in the other. Touch the soldering iron to the underside area of where you will be applying the solder and heat up the object slightly. Then slowly slide the piece of solder under the tip, melting as much solder as you will need for the specific project. Pull away the solder first, but leave the soldering iron on for a few more seconds to allow the solder to melt around the join, making a good connection, then remove the iron. Let it cool. It doesn't need to take more than a few seconds, but don't blow on it, as this will make it deteriorate in the long run. A good connection is smooth and flat and shiny, not a bubble or blob.
The multimeter is used to measure electrical properties such as AC or DC voltage, current, resistance, and continuity. Rather than having separate meters, this device combines a voltmeter, an ammeter, and an ohm meter. For voltage and resistance, snap the power probe into the appropriate socket and the ground probe into the socket labeled for voltage. Turn the multimeter on and place the probes in separate wires to be measured. If the display is not showing any discrete value, turn the range selector until one can be found. Note what value the selector is on as it changes the magnitude at which the voltage or resistance is being measured. For current, snap the power into the appropriate socket and the ground probe labeled for current, 10 amperes. The current itself must pass through the meter, as opposed to voltage that can be measured simply by placing the probes on the circuit.